How far, how long, and how much? How far can you go on a charge? How long does it take to charge? And how much does it cost to fill her up? Those are the three questions I get, usually in that order, almost every day as a Tesla rideshare driver. The quick answer to each one of those questions is, it depends. Here's how I like to answer each of those questions. How far can you go on a charge? When a passenger asks me, how far can you go on a charge? What they're really looking for is some kind of ballpark number, and I like to give that to them with a couple caveats. So first I tell them that the rated range of this 2024 Model Y long range all-wheel drive is 310 miles. And then I like to explain that that will vary based on a number of factors. In general, in the summer, I am seeing better than that as a rated range estimate for a full battery charge. But in the winter, obviously it goes the other way and you get less than that rated range. So I like to tell them that it will get between 300 and 350 miles worth of range in the summer, and then somewhere in the 240 to 260 mile range in the winter. Obviously, all of that depends on how cold or how hot are we talking, what kind of driving you're doing. And then I do go through some of those scenarios, and I also like to compare that to a gas car. People have a little bit of a generalized idea of how many miles they can get out of a gas car, but they're not always thinking that they're going to get lower mileage in the winter than in the summer. But that is the case in a gas car. So I try to equate it to that of a gas car to make sure they realize that, hey, this is something that really does affect all vehicles. And so how far can you go depends on whether it's city or highway driving. It depends on the weather. It can depend on even other factors of weather, like whether you've got a headwind or a tailwind that you're dealing with on a long road trip. So a lot of those factors come into play. In general, when someone asks, how far can I go on a charge? 300 miles is a fair number, knowing that sometimes you could honestly get a little more than that. Sometimes you're going to get less. But that's a number that they can relate to and have an idea of, okay, how far can I go compared to a tank of gas in whatever car that they might have. The next question that usually follows is, how long does it take to charge? Again, it depends. If we're plugging in at home on a 240 volt line, for instance, I do have a Tesla wall connector. It's the 3rd generation Tesla wall connector, and it will charge at 48 amps, which supplies 40 to 42 miles of range per hour that I'm plugged in. So if I've used up 40 miles the previous day, well, then it's only going to take an hour to charge up. If I've used 120 miles, then it's going to take roughly 3 hours to charge up. And each of those numbers, I'm careful to make sure they realize that any amount of miles that they are reasonably going to use during a day can be recouped in the evening while they are at home and sleeping, so that they can wake up with a full charge every morning, ready to go another 250 to 300 miles every single day. One thing I also like to point out is I like to make sure they realize just how convenient it is to plug in. Sometimes their first impression of hearing, oh my gosh, it's going to take 2 hours, it's going to take 4 hours or 6 hours to charge up, they might have a slightly negative reaction to that number, thinking that that sounds like it takes forever. I make sure to put that in context that they're going to be charging at night while they're sleeping. And so all it really does is it takes them 5 seconds to plug in the car. Then you don't have to worry about it. And while you're enjoying your evening or while you're sleeping, your car will be charging and it will be ready for you when you wake up. And so to put that in perspective, what I like to point out is What if every garage or every home came with a fuel tank of gas or diesel? And what if little elves got up in the middle of the night while you're sleeping and filled up your tank for you? Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be convenient? And people are like, oh yeah, okay. What they're forgetting is that it is so convenient to charge at home. The fact that it takes 1 to 6 hours to charge up is really irrelevant. Either way, it's going to charge up while I'm sleeping. You really can't get any more convenient than that. For me, it's filling up with gas that is inconvenient. You can't do that at home. You have to go to a gas station. And yes, it might only take 5 minutes, but you have to make the trip there. You're either stopping on the way to work or on the way home or somewhere in between, and it's never convenient. But yet you have to take that time to go out of your way to fill up, and yet you never have to go out of your way, assuming you can charge at home. It is just so convenient. And so for that reason, I like to explain that the convenience of plugging in at home greatly outweighs the number of hours it may or may not take for you to charge back up after a day's driving. So after they've learned how far you can go and how long it takes to charge, the next question that almost always follows is, how much does it cost? Again, it depends. If we're plugging in at home, well, now we're using home electric rates. I'm here in upstate New York, specifically near the Albany area, and National Grid charges us about 17.5, maybe 18 cents per kilowatt hour. I think by the time it's delivered, it's about 18 cents. Let's call it that as a nice round number. 18 cents times 60 kilowatt hours, if I were to do a 0 to say 80% charge, that would use about 60 kilowatt hours. So we're talking right around $10 worth of electricity to go 250, almost 300 miles. And when you put that in perspective for people, that at home electric rates, they could drive 250, almost 300 miles on $10 worth of electricity, and they realize, hey, on $10 worth of gas, there is no way I'm going to drive anywhere near 250 miles. They probably won't even get 100 miles on gas. Then that really then starts to drive home the point of how inexpensive per mile driving electric really is. There's really no cheaper way currently to get down the road from point A to point B than using an electric car, specifically a battery electric car, and plugging in at home if you're able to. Of course, on a road trip, or if you do not have home charging, you're going to use some sort of DC fast charging, and those are elevated rates, of course. Most superchargers in this area charge somewhere in the 40 to 42 cents per kilowatt hour, but I've also plugged in at places in Virginia or New Jersey that are as low as 22 cents per kilowatt hour. And if you're able to charge up at a DC fast charger for that kind of an inexpensive rate, that's well worth it. So that does, of course, cost a little more per mile for your charging compared to home charging, but we're still talking somewhere in the 5 cents to maybe worst case 10 cents per mile of charging if we're talking DC fast charging only. So overall, what I like to equate to people is then move that into the gasoline world. Roughly, the cost per mile to drive electric is around 1/4 of the cost to drive gasoline per mile. So again, when they learn that hey, I could go down the road for 25% of the cost that I am right now, that really adds up, especially if someone has a longer commute. That adds up every day and really adds to the overall cost of ownership, or lack of cost of ownership in the electric case, of being able to have very inexpensive transportation and very inexpensive fuel costs. And fuel costs get even lower if you're able to have solar at home. I do have solar. We've had solar now for just about 10 years, and I did make a video on that So if you want to, you can click on the video and learn about our solar installation that we did back in 2015. Keep your wheels below you, and we'll see you on the next one.